Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. Today we are going to be working on an enclosure for a couple of llamas. I'm hoping that they breed quickly so that we can fill up the enclosure with lots of llamas, as they do like being in groups and can have up to 30 in each habitat. I did a lot of building for this one, so it is a bit of a longer video. I think the in-game time for the speed build was like 4 or 4.5 hours. Time really did get away from me. This habitat is located right next to the piggies. The initial shape of the habitat is cute, but a little bit basic. So you'll see that I immediately did some fun stuff with the terrain tool, where I basically built a big hill, or well, a small hill. I wanted to make use of the giant wall that previously had nothing except those wooden beams. Those beams didn't really serve much purpose, especially considering what a fantastic viewing spot it could be. So I decided to transform the wall into a massive window. This will allow guests to have a basically unobstructed view of the llamas as they roam around their space. I wanted to build in that massive hill for two reasons. One, it enhances the landscape to make it a little bit more interesting than the mostly flat terrains of the other habitats. And two, it allows the llamas to climb right up to the window, which is a super cool view for the guests. I didn't want the only view of the habitat to be from the piggies' viewing platform, and I wanted a view from the bottom of the hill as well. To achieve this, I needed to do a couple of things. I needed to do some terraforming to make the hill extend down with a section for the llamas to hang out at the bottom, and I needed to build a viewing section at the base of it with some space for the guests and ensure that it was actually going to have a really clear view of the entire habitat, as I didn't want them to complain that they couldn't see anything, which often happens. I extended the pathway and built in some stairs, so you actually had to go down into the viewing gallery to see the llamas. When building out the viewing gallery, I used the terrain stamp to get those perfectly straight lines, and then had the height set at 4 meters, so the stairs to get into the gallery would be exactly one path tile of stairs down on either side. It just made my life a lot easier, and it was easier than doing something random and then just having to work out the stairs later. Also, thankfully, the research has been going really well, and I was able to add in the one-way barriers here so the llamas will not be freaking out, and I don't have to add in any of those ugly security signs. I did this big terraforming cutout, which was going to be a big pond area, until I realized that my water pump didn't extend that far. You don't see it because I cut it out of the video, but I still tried to make it work and did this like underground tunneling system so that the pond would lead to the water pump area. but no matter what I tried, it just wasn't working out. So I just made this area a cozy resting nook for the llamas and ended up placing their bedding there a little bit later on in the video. The boundary of the water pump meant that I was a little bit limited as to where I could place their water section. I ended up having it near the staff entry gate on the side of the big hill and made it look like this mini stream there, maybe because the water was running off the mountain, causing a bunch of erosion over time, and it naturally formed this little pond or little stream. At this point in the video, the habitat doesn't look like much. It's not very exciting, but I'm happy with the basic structure of it. I didn't need to do too much management for this habitat. I added the habitat to the zoo entrance east and mechanic work zones and added in an extra keeper. As I like to have one keeper per habitat, I have 3 keepers in the zoo entrance east work zone. And at this point, the vet is still really happy and not too overworked, and the same goes for the mechanics. But I think once I add one more habitat to this section, I'll definitely have to add in another vet and mechanic. For the viewing gallery, I knew that I wanted it to look kind of like a cave, so I spent a while trying to decide how high I wanted the fence to be so that it was high enough for guests to walk through without it looking too enclosed. I started at 3 meters, which after some tests with the roofing, it just wasn't high enough, so I increased the height to 4 meters, which looked a little bit better. After some initial testing with what the full roof would look like, 5 meters ended up being what I went for. Choosing the aesthetic of what I wanted the viewing gallery to look like was a bit hard because I was getting tired of just the plain rocks that I used for the piggies viewing platform, but I wanted it to be an extension of that whole section so that it would blend in nicely. I decided to do this curved roofing section out of rocks, which I do add a bit of extra pizzazz to later on in the video. Later on, I also added in some metal roofing and breeze block for the walls, which I think break up the rocks a little bit as well. Before I added the rest of the roof on, I added in more decoration because it's really hard to do when there's a ceiling in the way. Around the window, I added in 1 meter high breeze block walls with wooden beams, which is a mini shout out to the building materials for the Welcome Center. I also just think that in real life, so many kids would scratch themselves on the edge of that brick wall, and the wood finish is a little bit more realistic. I wanted to do something a little bit different for the education screens and donation bins. I always just put them on the walls, and that's going to get super boring real quick if that's my only idea in this zoo. I did see this idea while I was scrolling on Pinterest, and it's using these rock slabs almost as tables and embedding the habitat education screens and donation bins into them as if you're sliding money into like the rock face, which would look really cool even in a real world zoo. In my experience, the built-in screens are also super realistic for zoos. I first added in a bunch of smaller rocks around the edge as the rock slab wasn't thick enough to not have anything underneath it, and then I added in the flat rock slabs on top so it was as flat as a rock can be in this game. Finally, at the back of them I added in some larger rocks so it looked really built into the wall. I added in the education screens on top and did some fiddling so that they were all perfect. I then realized that the donation bins weren't going to work, so I had to extend the path a bit that's hidden underneath the rock so I could place the donation bins exactly where I wanted them to go. I started with 2 screens on each side and 4 screens on the back wall, but I switched the 4 screens to 3 as it looked like there were just way too many. I really love how it turned out, and I think I'm going to replicate this one again throughout the zoo, maybe using different materials, not always rocks. To utilities. Of course, the utilities didn't extend out this far, which was a little bit of a problem. I didn't really know where I was going to place the utilities, but I did work out where I'd be building next over that way and built out a little staff path, which brings me to a little tangent about the next part of the zoo. For the next part of the zoo, I'm going to need an entirely new work zone because it's going to be pretty big, which is exciting. It's going to be super near to the piggies and llamas enclosures, so that section will be getting built out a little bit more. It's going to house 3 different animals and a mini food court, but that's the only spoiler you're going to get about this new section out of me for now. I've gone ahead and broken all of the animals that I have access to down into different sections. I don't have all of the DLCs, so I might be missing some for now. There's going to be 8 different zones in this zoo, along with some animals that don't really fit into any of the archetypes, which I'll squeeze in between each of the zones. Some of these zones are going to be really small, like the piggies, because there's only 2 animals, but some zones will be absolutely massive with like 9+ animals. Back to the viewing gallery now. The base of the walls I built out of breeze blocks so that it wasn't just this rock, and added in some glass at the top because this is really the only way that light is going to be entering the viewing gallery. I made the glass too high using 2-meter high walls, so I had to replace it with 1-meter walls. On all of the sides of the viewing gallery are some gaps before the wall starts, so I filled them in using big desert rocks. And on the side of the gallery where the path curves, there's this odd garden grassy space which I turned into a small little garden section with a barrier made from the small 3D rectangles in this reddy brown color that I've used for the donation bins. There weren't many plant options available when filtering by Central/South America grasslands, so I used these purple flowers and small green bushes to fill it out. You'll see that initially I didn't want the rocks to show through to the other side of the breeze block wall, but I ended up quite liking how that looked, so I went for that instead. And I made sure that the rocks were rotating in different directions so they didn't all look exactly the same. I made the entrance held up with these big stone pillars, so it really feels as if you're entering a cave. I used metal clad for the ceiling and made the edging out of the wooden beams on both the top and bottom of the glass portion of the walls, and added on the roof trim around each of the edges as well, so the roof isn't entirely flat. While I'm busy building, let me share a little bit of information about llamas with you. In-game, llamas come with the South America expansion pack. They're not part of the base Planet Zoo game. There are 7 million llamas in the wild, which means that there is basically no concern about them. They are native to the mountains and steppes of Western South America and are naturally found in Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. Llamas have since been introduced all over the world as livestock because of the high quality wool they produce. They are domesticated animals and have lived alongside humans as livestock and pack animals for 4,000 years. I copied the rock columns into the habitat itself, as well as it's not really realistic for the ceiling not to be held up by anything. I still felt like the rocks were too bland and basic and wanted to add something extra onto them, so I used the same small 3D rectangles and made an edging around the curved rock section of the roof. Don't panic, it doesn't stay this fluorescent pink color. I do change it to a nice charcoal grey instead. Although I do wish that I'd started with the grey colour instead of the pink, because individually selecting every single one of those blocks to change it to grey took a hot second. Okay, moving on to the actual habitat now. In terms of what llamas need for their terrain distribution, they need grass. Llamas love grass. Who would have thought that, considering they're grazing animals? Big shocker. They also don't mind a touch of soil, so I added some of that around the habitat. But then I go in and just go to town painting the habitat with grass. I did use both short and long grass, so hey, there is a little bit of variety. Once their terrain was all in the green, literally, I added some rocks around the water. If you've watched my other videos, I'm sure you know by now that this is my favorite way to make a water feature look built in and natural in a habitat. The rocks do look really nice. I like their placement here a lot, but I do have to go back in and change them a little later on because they cut off some areas of the habitat for the llamas, and I wanted them to be able to roam around as freely as possible. I'm hoping to eventually have the maximum number of llamas in here, which is 30, and I planned the habitat to have the exact amount of space for this, so it's really important that areas aren't blocked off for them. Once the rocks were placed, I started on plants. I encountered a similar issue as I did with the collared peccary, where there really aren't too many grassland plants for South/Central America, but I did my best with what I had access to. I added in a massive tree to the right of the habitat, which leans over onto the guest path, and I really liked the look of this. I think it's really pretty. I added some reeds into the water area, of course, and changed the height of some of them and pushed some of them back into the rocks for variety. Then I placed a few bushes around the place and popped in a few different palm trees, and finished off with those really pretty purple flowers. I didn't like how that flat bit at the bottom of the hill looked. It wasn't very realistic, so I decided to push some, again, rocks into the hill and make it like a mini cliff section. I added in the llama's basic needs, so a food trough and some leaf bedding. And for enrichment, unfortunately, I've only unlocked toy enrichment for them, so I immediately started researching for them so I can add in food enrichment as soon as possible. That's everything I did to the habitat. Now I'm going to be working more on the fence because I think I've used this wooden log barrier way too much and I want to do something a little bit more custom. I first go in and adjust parts of the barrier because guests were crowding the stairs, which I don't really like. It's mostly fine at the moment because there's under 1,000 guests at the zoo, but once it gets into the 2,000 range, it's going to be an absolute nightmare. To customize the fence, I take those wooden beams that I love so much and duplicate them all around the fence edging. I take a brief pause here because my llamas were mating, which is so cute. Yes, they did get pregnant from that one mating interaction, so we will be having a little baby llama in the zoo already. Once the logs were duplicated all around the llama's habitat barrier, I shifted the wooden log barrier so it's not visible to guests. I don't want to get rid of the barrier completely, as with certain build items, guests still stop and pretend to look through, and they often complain that it's a terrible view because, well, duh, it's not supposed to be one, and they crowd pathways because it's not supposed to be a viewing location, which is really annoying. Then I duplicate the charcoal grey blocks and move them around the top, bottom, and side edges of the wooden beams, which adds in some really nice color contrast and blends really perfectly with the rock ceiling. Then I go through and do exactly the same thing on the other side of the habitat. This took a lot longer because of the curved edges of the habitat, so it wasn't as simple as copy and paste. I had to copy, adjust, paste, and sometimes adjust again so that it was lined up nicely. The end result is really nice though, so I think it's worth it. I love where I placed that big tree in the habitat because it pokes through the fence and looks really custom, like they adjusted the fence to build it around the tree branches. A thought for the piggies' habitat, I'm thinking of naming their section the Mud Hut. What are your thoughts? Is that a good name? Do you have some alternative suggestions? Please let me know in the comments below. That's everything that I have for you today, but I'm ending on a super cute visual of the llamas mating. Thank you all so much for watching, I really appreciate it. If you have any suggestions at all for habitats or grassland animals that you'd like to see me add to the zoo, please let me know in the comments below, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!